I think the college football world owes an apology to Bo Nix. Many college football fans, including myself, definitely doubted Bo Nix going into his Oregon career and really doubted him after that Week 1 performance against Georgia. He was very much up and down at Auburn, and overall, Nix became more of a meme than a serious NFL prospect, but now he has proved us all wrong, and there's really nothing we can say but props to him. In today's video, we're going to continue our report card series as Bo Nix has now played his way into potentially the first round of the 2023 NFL Draft, has had an incredible season for Oregon, and is changing the narrative around his name. We're going to talk about that and then give him his report card. But before we get started with that, we're just over 4,000 subscribers away from 100K, so be sure to help me out by hitting that subscribe button. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, turn on notifications so you never miss when I upload, and let me know what player I could do in my next report card video. Now, let's get started and talk about Bo Nix. In order to grade Bo Nix, we first need to hear his story. His dad, Patrick, would become a high school standout and chose to play for Auburn. While becoming a backup for the Tigers, he eventually took over as a starter and excelled. He led his team to an 11-0 record, and by the time he had left Auburn, he was one of the greatest and most beloved quarterbacks in Auburn football history. He'd eventually go into high school coaching, and then he would have his first son named Bo. Bo loved football from a very young age, and apparently wanted nothing to do with traditional kids' toys like Legos or cars. He had a football in his hands all the time and would only watch TV when his dad would put on old football films. His dad eventually took the offensive coordinator job at Georgia Tech, and during that time, his dad would paint a football field on the grass in the backyard, and Bo would play in an Auburn jersey out in the backyard. He'd pretend to be the Auburn quarterback and would throw the ball to his other family members, and little did he know how that would happen one day. By the time he was in 3rd grade, Bo was watching his dad's football practices and learning the throwing mechanics of pro-level players. After his dad was fired by Miami, he took over coaching for his son's flag football team. Him and Bo would come up with game plans, and somehow as a 3rd grader, he was reading defenses and preparing for games like big-time players did. When Bo got to 5th grade, his dad took the wide receiver's job at Charleston Southern, and Bo would actually throw to the players and run drills with them. Apparently, Bo would even get so upset when they lost the drills, and they had to remind him he was going up against college football players. But he didn't care, he wanted to win. Now, by the time he was in 8th grade, he was already the starting quarterback for Scottsboro High School, and scouts began to realize he was going to be a big-time recruit. His father would then become the head coach of the high school, and Nix developed into a star. He said he tried to model his game off of guys like Johnny Manziel and Deshaun Watson. When he was a sophomore, his father implemented an option-style offense similar to the one that was run at Auburn. Bo was definitely a film guru, and he would do his homework and wait for his dad to come home so they could talk football and review film from the previous game. His dad then took the head coaching job at Pinson Valley High School, so Bo would transfer there as a junior, and his stock grew even more. He became the state of Alabama's all-time leader in career yards and touchdowns while he was there, and led his team to 2 straight titles. He was considered the top dual-threat quarterback in high school football recruiting, but it actually was not as obvious as it seemed as to where he would go. It eventually come down to Auburn and Ohio State, but since Gus Malzahn began recruiting him in 8th grade, and his dad and his fandom of the school, it looked like Auburn was a lock. But apparently Ohio State was still an option because of the coaching situation. Once Malzahn's contract was extended by Auburn though, that was the final straw, and Nix committed to the Tigers and made it happen. This was the biggest quarterback recruit of the Gus Malzahn era, and Nix would have unbelievable hype going into Auburn. According to 24/7 Sports, Nix was a 5-star recruit, the #1 dual-threat quarterback, and the 33rd best prospect in the class of 2019. Nix would beat out both Joey Gatewood and Malik Willis for the starting job, and he got off to a hot start. In their first game, he led a game-winning drive over Justin Herbert's Oregon Ducks, and they get off to a 1-0 start. Auburn would go on to have a great season, and he'd also beat Alabama in the final regular season game. As a freshman, Nix threw for 2,542 yards with 16 touchdowns, 6 picks, and a 58% completion percentage. He also had 7 touchdowns on the ground and was named the SEC Freshman of the Year. Everyone expected Nix to get even better in 2020, but it was somewhat of a struggle for him. This time, he only threw for 2,415 yards with 12 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. He had a lot of costly plays, his numbers were up and down, he wasn't consistent, and it seemed he regressed in year 2. The only thing that went up for him was his completion percentage, and some Auburn fans were beginning to become skeptical of Nix. 2021 would not change anything. He'd have a new head coach in Brian Harsin after Malzahn was fired and took the UCF job. Besides a couple of spectacular moments, Nix was pretty disappointing last year. He threw for a total of 2,294 yards with 11 touchdowns and 3 picks, but he did get hurt against Mississippi State and would miss the last few games of the season. At this time, the Auburn program had sort of become a dumpster fire, as after a 6-2 start, they finished 6-7. Some of the coaches and players started leaving in a mass exodus. Boosters didn't want Harsin anymore, and many people were done with Bo Nix. This was now 2 years of below average play for him, and Auburn fans expected much better out of him. Somehow, the kid who grew up the son of an Auburn legend and dreamed of playing quarterback for Auburn was actually going to leave. He decided to enter the transfer portal and find a school that would better suit him, where he could get a fresh start and save his career. That school would end up being Oregon. This was sort of crazy, and some Oregon fans were not even that high on it. Anthony Brown had become the starting quarterback over the last year and a half for the Ducks, and he was one of those transfer guys that didn't really do a whole lot, and many viewed Nix as the same sort of player. Someone who was average at his old school and wasn't going to do a whole lot. And some didn't even think Nix would win the job. Highly recruited quarterbacks Ty Thompson and Jay Butterfield were both already on the roster, but with a whole new coaching staff coming in, Nix was probably going to have the upper hand with his experience. That would end up happening, and Nix won the starting job, and he'd get a chance to play Georgia for the 4th time. How did it end up going? Not great. In an absolutely embarrassing beatdown at the hands of Georgia, Nix went 21 of 37 for 173 yards without a touchdown and 2 interceptions. They lost 49-3, and everyone was saying that Nix was terrible, Dan Lanning was in over his head, and Oregon could maybe miss a bowl game. I'll admit, I was one of the guys on the train that was not very high on Nix or Oregon after that game, but could you really blame me for thinking that? Nix and the Oregon program obviously did not care, as ever since then, he has gone on an absolute tear. Against Eastern Washington, Nix threw for 277 yards and 5 touchdowns, and they won easily. After that, number 12 BYU would come to town, and Nix would combine for 5 touchdowns in that game. 3 of those came on the ground, and 2 came through the air, as they beat the tar out of BYU 41-20. After that, Nix would go on the road to play against Washington State, who had a great defense. In that game, he threw for 428 yards and 3 touchdowns, including a game-winning score, and then Oregon would get a late pick 6 and win 44-41. Oregon was now 3-1, but no one was taking them seriously. The following weekend, Nix would play against Stanford, as he threw for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns, and also ran for 141 yards and 2 scores. This was now the 3rd game of 4+ touchdowns for him, and Nix was starting to catch fire. After that, they go on the road to play against Arizona, and in that game, Nix would once again have 3 touchdowns. He didn't have 1 through the air, but he had 3 on the ground, and they easily beat the Wildcats. Oregon was now 5-1, and they'd be matched up against number 9 UCLA. In what was supposed to be a big-time showdown, Oregon was the better team for pretty much the entire game, and Nix was pretty much perfect. He threw for 283 yards with 5 touchdowns, not a single interception, and completed 79% of his passes. UCLA was also supposed to have a good defense and were supposed to be legit, but Oregon now proved that they were the ones that were legit. We now get to his most recent game, which came on the road against Cal. Nix still completed 77% of his passes. Nix threw for 412 yards, 3 touchdowns, and completed 77% of his passes, but he did have 2 interceptions. It didn't stop there though, as he had 3 touchdowns on the ground. Nix would score all the touchdowns for Oregon against Cal that night, and he's now playing his way back into the NFL conversation. There aren't a ton of big boards that are really that updated right now, but for the most part, there's a lot of chatter about Nix climbing into that first round, becoming one of those top-tier quarterback prospects. I can't really say I blame him, as he really has been tremendous. He's thrown for 2,221 yards, 20 touchdowns, and only 5 interceptions, while completing 73% of his passes, and he also has 11 touchdowns on the ground. So now let's get to his report card. The first category is stats. In terms of passing, Nix is 4th in the conference with 2,221 yards, is 4th in the Pac-12 in touchdowns with 20, is 6th in terms of interceptions, has the 2nd highest completion percentage with 72.3%, has the number 1 quarterback rating of 169.7, is 10th in rushing with 449 yards, and is 1st in rushing touchdowns. He is top 5 or top 3 in every category in the Pac-12 right now, and his numbers nationally are also terrific. That's why he gets an A. Second category is wins. Right now, Nix currently has 2 wins over top 25 teams and 3 road victories. 6 of his 7 wins have come against Power 5 teams, and for this I give him a B+. That is for 2 reasons. 1, because BYU has fallen off tremendously, and 2, because he really needed to put up a better performance against Georgia. He still has an opportunity for wins against Utah and potentially USC in the Pac-12 title game, so Nix can improve on that, but for now we're going to give him a B+. In terms of his draft stock, Nix also gets an A. Going into the year, he was probably seen as a late round pick, more than likely an undrafted free agent. Right now, Nix is playing himself into that first tier of NFL draft quarterbacks and could end up becoming a first round pick when it's all said and done. I'm still not really seeing that officially anywhere, but for the most part, I believe that to be true. Because of that, NIX is going to get an A for the draft stock. Finally, we have to talk about the it factor. NIX made that game-winning play against Washington State, has elevated his game in every big game since Georgia, has put up big numbers, and has had great touchdowns both through the air and on the ground. Because of that, he's going to get an A. Again, the only thing really holding him back was his performance against Georgia, and to give an A+, you really have to be super special in my eyes. I think NIX has been insane this season, and overall, his grade is going to be an A for me. He got 3 A's and a B+, and we're going to average that out to an A. Congratulations to Bo Nix. You've done a tremendous job, you've saved your career, and you've put all your doubters and skeptics like me to rest. But what do you guys think? If you're an Oregon fan, what do you think of Bo Nix, and where do you rank him amongst Oregon quarterbacks? Do you guys think he's an NFL player? And what players should I take a look at in my next report card video? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.
Thank you.